Adam Posen is the president of the Peterson Institute for International Economics, and he helped explain the agenda for the Moscow meeting and what challenges the G20 faces. All right, we seem to be having we have it now. Here it is.
Broadest agenda we get in the economic sphere. The G7 tends to be narrower because it actually is less important now. It has a little bit of a security orientation, and it tends to not reflect, understandably, the large countries like China, Brazil, Mexico, India, Russia that are not in it. In the G20, it starts off with core financial and macro issues. It looks a little bit at trade. It does a certain amount of what's called surveillance, meaning do other individual countries' domestic policies help or hurt their neighbors, the rest of the global economy? And it's really about rules of the road. So I think we're going to talk a lot about currencies, we're going to talk a lot about monetary and fiscal policies, and we're going to talk a little about the trade agenda at the G20.
When you mean rules, do you mean perhaps financial regulatory issues as well?
Indeed, although that tends to be done at a very technocratic level, so there's this weird gap. Right now, there's this thing related to the G20 called the FSB, or the Financial Stability Board, which is a committee of regulators from all over the world, but mostly the G20 countries. And they're going through things at an incredible level of detail. I mean, just mind-boggling level of detail. And then the implementation, though, is up to the people who are sitting in the G20 room.
All right.
So they're not going to get as much in the nitty-gritty.
Let's take a step back from the details. Let's talk about austerity versus growth. This has been very controversial because it affects so many people around the world. You know, if you think about what's happening in Europe, the people have blamed essentially austerity for not having the growth, but at the same time, with no growth, there feels the more, I guess, need for austerity. Where's the balance in that from the people you talk to?
The balance comes down to something pretty simple, which is you have to decide how much your low growth now is temporary and how much it depends, how much it's baked in the cake. In other words, if you're growing slowly now, if you're Greece, you're growing slowly now because your fast growth in the past was totally funded by capital flows, hot money, real estate, stuff you can't sustain. Then you basically do have to cut back because you're never going to be able to grow enough to keep up with your spending. If, on the other hand, you're Spain, for example, and you're an economy that, yeah, you had a bit of a party, yeah, you bought up a lot of real estate, but in the end, you were growing in terms of productivity, you were exporting, you were doing a lot of good things, it's reasonable to think you'll get back to that growth path, and therefore you shouldn't need to cut back as much now.